Retired Army Sergeant James Morgan had always found solace in the quiet moments of his backyard. After decades of service overseas, the tranquility of his small suburban home was a welcome retreat. But there was one thing that made his yard feel truly like his own sanctuary, a towering rare oak tree that he had spent years nurturing. It wasn't just any tree. Appraisers had valued it at $54,000 because of its uniqueness and the care it had received. To James, it was a living monument to patience, resilience, and the simple joys he had earned after a lifetime of sacrifice. One sunny Tuesday morning, as James sipped his black coffee on the porch, his peace shattered with the arrival of a letter slipped under his door. The official HOA seal caught his eye immediately, and a sinking feeling crept into his chest. He reached down, picked up the envelope, and slowly tore it open. Inside was a typed notice stamped with urgency. Immediate removal of tree on property. Required. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words again. The letter claimed the tree violated Homeowners Association rules. They cited safety concerns, property line encroachment, and non-compliance with landscaping regulations. James blinked, unable to believe what he was reading. The tree had stood tall and healthy for over 2 decades. Why had this notice come now? Why hadn't anyone mentioned any problem before? Confusion mixed with disbelief. James reread the notice, searching for any hint of explanation or room for appeal. There was none. The letter demanded the tree's removal within 30 days, threatening escalating fines and legal action if ignored. The HOA was known to be strict, but this felt unprecedented. To James, it was more than a nuisance. It was an assault on something deeply personal. He paced his living room, the quiet ticking of the clock suddenly deafening. How could a piece of paper wield so much power? His neighbors, some he'd served with in local veterans groups, had never mentioned any concerns. No complaints had come his way. His tree had been admired by passers-by, its broad canopy a symbol of natural beauty in a sea of cookie-cutter yards. The veteran's mind raced. Was this a mistake? A misunderstanding? He decided to call the HOA office. After several rings, a curt receptionist answered, offering no solace, only a reiteration of the letter's demands. They told him the board had voted unanimously that rules were rules and exceptions weren't allowed. James felt the walls closing in. Over the next few days, a restless unease settled over him. The tree that once gave him peace now loomed like a countdown clock. Every gust of wind, every falling leaf felt like a reminder of the looming deadline. He began to question everything. Was his peaceful retirement about to be disrupted by faceless bureaucrats? Was his right to enjoy his own property slipping away? The neighborhood seemed unchanged on the surface, but James noticed subtle shifts. He caught sidelong glances from neighbors he barely knew. A few passed with averted gaze. Others whispered behind closed doors. The story of the veteran and his tree was spreading quietly, but the truth behind the letter remained a mystery, a shadow looming larger with every passing hour. That night, James sat alone in his dimly lit living room, the letter folded, on the coffee table like a ticking time bomb. The quiet was shattered by his own racing thoughts. What was he willing to fight for? Could he stand against the cold machinery of the HOA? Or would he be forced to destroy the very thing that had come to symbolize hope and peace in his post-service life? For the first time in years, James felt the weight of uncertainty and the flicker of something deeper, a fight that would test not just his property rights, but his very spirit. James Morgan refused to accept the HOA's letter at face value. Something about it didn't sit right. The notice was cold, impersonal, and sudden, almost like a strike from nowhere. His mind churned with questions. Why target his tree now after all these years? Had there been complaints he wasn't told about? Or worse, was there some hidden agenda beneath the surface? Determined to find answers, James began digging. His first step was to comb through the HOA's governing documents, searching for the exact clause the board had cited. Late into the night, he sat at his desk with the worn binder, flipping through pages of bylaws, rules, and restrictions. The guidelines were dense and full of legal jargon, but nowhere did he find a clear reason to condemn his tree. There were rules about keeping yards tidy, regulations about fences and paint colors, but nothing explicitly forbidding a healthy, well-maintained tree like his. Next, James reached out to his neighbors. Some were friendly, some guarded. Few had heard anything official from the HOA, and none recalled any safety concerns or previous warnings about his tree. A few neighbors mentioned overhearing whispers about new plans brewing behind closed doors, but details were scarce. The veteran's unease grew. What kind of plans could prompt such an aggressive move? His suspicions led him to attend the next HOA board meeting. Inside the community clubhouse, the atmosphere was stiff and formal. The usual civility felt thin, like a layer barely holding back tension. James sat quietly at the back, listening as board members discussed routine matters. When the tree was finally brought up, the tone shifted. The president spoke coldly, reading a prepared statement about maintaining uniformity and safety, and protecting property values. But beneath the polished words, James detected something else, an undercurrent of urgency, almost nervousness. After the meeting, James lingered, hoping to ask questions. But board members avoided eye contact, their answers brief and rehearsed. One elder woman on the board murmured, "We all want what's best for the community," but wouldn't elaborate. The lack of transparency felt deliberate, like they were hiding something. Frustrated, James turned to local real estate agents and community planners. A few quietly confirmed that the neighborhood was under pressure from developers interested in expanding nearby. Land values had been rising sharply, and whispers of future zoning changes were spreading. It was possible the HOA was preparing to clear the way for something bigger, something that meant uprooting more than just trees. Back at home, James stared up at his towering oak, its leaves rustling softly in the breeze. To him, it was a symbol of his sacrifice, a reminder of stability after years of uncertainty. But now, it felt like a fragile relic, threatened by forces far beyond his control. That evening, he received an unexpected call from a fellow veteran and neighbor, Martha. Her voice was low but urgent. "Jim, be careful. This isn't just about the tree. The HOA's been pressured. Some of the board members stand to benefit from a development deal. They don't want anyone asking questions." James's heart pounded. If true, this was more than a property dispute. It was a battle over power, money, and control. His quiet retirement had been thrust into a dark and tangled fight. Despite the risks, James knew what he had to do next: gather evidence, find allies, and expose the truth before it was too late. But with every step forward, the shadow over, his home grew longer. The veteran realized that the tree was no longer just a tree. It had become a symbol of resistance, of the fight between a man and an invisible machine. And in the quiet suburb where he had hoped to find peace, a storm was quietly brewing. The day of the HOA meeting arrived, and Sergeant James Morgan felt the weight of every passing second as he approached the community clubhouse. Inside that nondescript building, decisions were made. Decisions that now threatened to rip apart everything he had built. But James wasn't just showing up as a homeowner. He was standing up for every inch of ground that felt like home. The room was packed more than usual. Word had spread. Local residents, some curious, some concerned, filled the folding chairs. Cameras were set up discreetly by a few community members hoping to document the proceedings. A few familiar faces sat stiffly, their expressions unreadable. James sat near the front, clutching a folder filled with expert assessments, photographs, and letters from arborists who had inspected the oak tree. They confirmed it was healthy, posed no safety risks, and was well within the property lines. These documents were his armor against the cold bureaucracy he was about to face. When the HOA president, Ms. Linda Graves, called the meeting to order, the atmosphere stiffened. She was a woman of sharp words and rigid rules, and she wasted no time reiterating the official stance. The tree must go. "We appreciate Mr. Morgan's service," she began, voice measured but firm. "However, our rules apply to all residents, equally. The tree violates our covenant regarding landscaping and property line encroachments. The board has voted unanimously to enforce its removal." James rose, feeling a lump form in his throat, but his voice steady. "Ms. Graves, I respect the board's responsibility, but this tree has stood healthy for over 20 years. I've had arborists inspect it repeatedly. It's not dangerous. I've maintained it meticulously. Is there no room for compromise?" Murmur rippled through the crowd. James could see some faces soften, others harden. The president's eyes narrowed slightly, but she responded quickly. "The rules are clear. Allowing exceptions would set a precedent. We must be consistent." James laid out his evidence methodically. Reports, photos, expert testimonies, hoping reason would prevail. But the board members exchanged glances and whispered among themselves as if weighing something heavier than facts. Then came the subtle, chilling moment. A fellow board member, Mr. Paul Henson, leaned forward, voice low but cutting. "Mr. Morgan, this isn't personal. It's about protecting our community's interests. If one resident is allowed to bend the rules, the entire neighborhood's integrity is at risk." James's heart pounded. Was this really about integrity? Or something else lurking beneath the surface? When the floor opened for comments, a few neighbors stepped up. One woman quietly expressed concern about the tree's roots possibly damaging sidewalks. Concerns James had never heard voiced before. Another said the tree blocked sunlight from her garden. Though mild, these complaints were weaponized, feeding the board's argument. James felt the room closing in, the balance shifting against him. Despite his calm, a storm brewed inside. He realized this meeting was less about the tree and more about the power behind it. As the board wrapped up, the president delivered the final blow. "The removal order stands. You have 30 days. Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action." The weight of those words hit James hard. The crowd began to disperse, some whispering sympathy, others avoiding his gaze. James remained seated, mind racing through possibilities, doubts, and fears. Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet streets. James looked back at the clubhouse and silently vowed. This was only the beginning. He wouldn't back down. He had given his life defending his country, and now he would defend his home. But deep down, James knew he was stepping into a battle, where the rules were not always clear and the opponents were not always visible. The clash of wills had begun, and it would test everything he held dear. After the tense HOA meeting, James Morgan returned home feeling more alone than ever. The oak tree in his yard, once a symbol of peace, now seemed a silent witness to an invisible war unfolding around him. He knew he couldn't fight this battle without allies, but where could he find them? In the following days, the neighborhood's atmosphere shifted. What had once been quiet friendliness became a complex web of whispers and half-truths. James noticed subtle changes in how neighbors looked at him. Some gave him sympathetic nods, while others hurried past, avoiding eye contact as if afraid to be seen supporting a losing cause. One afternoon, while watering his lawn, James overheard two neighbors talking just beyond the fence. Their voices were hushed, but charged with urgency. "Did you hear what the HOA is planning? They want to clear a lot of yards for that big development project." "Yeah, and anyone who stands in the way gets the full board's wrath." "I wouldn't want to be in Morgan's shoes." The word sent a chill through James. If the rumors were true, the tree was just a small piece of a much larger plan. But who could he trust in a neighborhood where loyalty seemed to shift like the wind? Determined to understand where people stood, James began reaching out quietly. He knocked on doors, sometimes finding reluctant ears, sometimes finding closed doors. Among the hesitant were longtime residents like Martha, the veteran neighbor who had warned him earlier. She confided that many neighbors feared retaliation from the HOA if they spoke up, fearing fines or strained relations. But there were also surprises. A few neighbors, particularly younger families who had recently moved in, expressed quiet support. One evening, a group gathered at James's porch, offering stories of their own brushes with the HOA's rigid policies. They didn't want to be publicly identified, but their words offered a spark of hope. "You're not alone, Jim." One woman whispered, "We're watching." Yet the atmosphere wasn't without its darker side. Some neighbors had begun siding openly with the HOA, believing the board's promise that the tree was a safety hazard. James overheard conversations blaming him for causing tension and making trouble. The veteran realized that some saw his fight as selfish or disruptive rather than courageous. Adding to the complexity, James received an anonymous letter slipped under his door one evening. The message was simple but clear. Drop this fight or face consequences. No signature, no explanation, just a threat. His heart raced, but his resolve hardened. This wasn't just about a tree anymore. It was about standing up to intimidation and injustice. Meanwhile, the HOA continued its quiet campaign. Notices were sent to neighbors reinforcing the rules, and some homes received warnings about landscaping compliance. The community was being subtly pressured to conform, to fall in, line behind the board's agenda. Despite the growing tension, James found strength in unexpected places. Local veterans groups began to take interest in his story. A few community activists offered legal advice. A neighborhood blogger started covering the dispute, drawing attention beyond their small enclave. But with every new ally came new risks. The more attention James attracted, the more the HOA seemed determined to crush dissent swiftly. One night, as he sat under the canopy of his beloved oak, James reflected on the fragile line between friend and foe. The tree's branches stretched, wide and strong, yet beneath the surface, roots intertwined with uncertain soil, much like the alliances he was trying to build. James knew this was more than a property dispute. It was a test of community, courage, and conviction. And as the deadline for removal loomed closer, the whispers in the neighborhood grew louder, some urging surrender, others promising resistance. In the quiet tension of the dusk, James Morgan understood one thing clearly. The fight for his tree was a fight for his dignity, his rights, and the truth hidden beneath the whispers. And in that fight, he would not stand alone, even if the neighborhood seemed ready to turn its back. The calendar on James Morgan's kitchen wall seemed to mock him. 30 days. That was all the time he had before the HOA's deadline would become a relentless deadline. One backed by escalating fines and legal action. Each day that ticked brought the weight of impossible choices crashing down on him. He sat at the table late one evening, the letter from the HOA still spread out before him. The ultimatum was clear and uncompromising. Remove the tree yourself, or face severe penalties that could quickly spiral into a financial nightmare. James knew they meant it. The HOA had already shown they weren't willing to negotiate, and the clock was now his fiercest adversary. The veteran's mind raced. How could he possibly cut down a tree worth $54,000, a living symbol of years of patience and healing? It was more than property. It was a piece of his soul. But the alternative was worse. To lose the battle and be crushed by fines meant losing his home, his security, the sanctuary he had fought so hard to create after service. James reached out to legal experts, hoping for a lifeline. But the response was sobering. HOA covenants were notoriously difficult to challenge in court. The cost of litigation alone could bankrupt a retiree. "You might win on principle," the lawyer said, "but the HOA has the money and the time. You don't." The days grew shorter, and the neighborhood's mood darkened. James noticed new "for sale" signs appearing on nearby lawns, evidence of the creeping development pressures he had suspected. Whispers of big-money developers buying up properties fueled his fear that the tree was collateral damage in a larger plan he couldn't stop. Despite growing anxiety, James refused to back down. He organized a small community meeting at his home, inviting neighbors, veterans, and local activists. The turnout surprised him, a mix of supporters and skeptics, all drawn by the unfolding drama. Together, they brainstormed ways to delay the removal, petition for reconsideration, or attract media attention. But as hope flickered, the HOA struck back. One morning, James found a certified letter waiting for him. It detailed an immediate fine, $1,000 for non-compliance with the removal order. More fines were promised for each day of delay. The message was clear. The HOA had no intention of letting this go quietly. That night, a storm raged outside, thunder echoing James's turmoil inside. He stood by the window, looking at the majestic oak silhouetted against the lightning-lit sky. The tree swayed gently, defiant despite the gathering storm, a mirror of James's own stubborn spirit. Yet the pressure was mounting from all sides. His family worried about the toll on his health. Friends urged caution. Some neighbors stopped returning his calls. The loneliness crept in like a shadow. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of phone calls, meetings, and legal consultations, James received a knock at his door. It was Paul Henson, the board member who had coldly dismissed him weeks ago. But this time, Henson's tone was different, quieter, almost conciliatory. "James," Henson said, "the board has given you an extension, another 2 weeks. But that's it. After that, we move forward. No more delays." James nodded, unsure whether to feel relief or deeper dread. The HOA was willing to grant a brief reprieve, but the fight was far from over. The clock was still ticking and time was slipping away. That night, as he prepared for bed, James looked out one last time at the tree that had become the center of his world. The oak stood strong, but its fate hung in the balance. James understood now that this fight was about more than rules or regulations. It was about resilience, the kind born from hardship and refusal to surrender. He whispered a silent vow. No matter what happened next, he would face it head on. The tree might be threatened, but so was his spirit, and that would not break. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable as the new deadline loomed, but James Morgan felt something shift beneath the surface, a faint glimmer of hope sparked by an unexpected discovery. What started as a quiet investigation soon spiraled into a revelation that could change everything. It began with a call from Martha, the veteran neighbor who had stood by James from the start. "Jim, I think I found something," she whispered, cautiously over the phone. "You need to come by. It's about the HOA board meeting minutes and some financial documents I dug up." Curious and cautious, James made his way to Martha's house that afternoon. She led him to her study, where piles of paperwork were spread across the table. Official records, budget reports, and emails obtained through a community transparency request. "Look at this," Martha said, pointing to a series of invoices and contracts. "These payments, they're going to a landscaping company, but not just any company. It's one owned by a man with close ties to the HOA president, Linda Graves." James's brow furrowed as he scanned the documents. The amounts were significant, and the timing suspicious. Many payments had increased sharply just weeks before the tree removal notice was sent. "They're pushing this tree removal through to benefit someone financially," Martha said quietly. Maybe to clear the way for development or landscaping contracts? James's heart pounded. It wasn't just about rules anymore. It was corruption, greed, and betrayal woven into the fabric of their community. Determined to find more proof, James and Martha teamed up. They spent evenings reviewing more records, comparing timelines, and gathering statements from reluctant HOA insiders. A pattern emerged: decisions favoring private interests, efforts to silence dissent, and a carefully crafted narrative painting James's tree as a hazard to justify its removal. With this evidence, James felt renewed purpose. He reached out to a local investigative journalist who had been following stories about HOA abuses. The journalist was intrigued and agreed to look into the matter, promising to expose whatever they found. But as the truth edged closer to light, the stakes grew higher. The anonymous threats against James intensified. One night, he found his mailbox vandalized, the documents he had collected torn and scattered. Neighbors who had quietly supported him began withdrawing, fearing association, with a fight that was becoming dangerous. Even Martha's phone was tapped with silent calls from unknown numbers. Despite the pressure, James pressed on. He organized a community meeting to share his findings, hoping to rally support and force the HOA to answer for its actions. The meeting was packed, the room buzzing with tension and anticipation. As James presented the evidence, murmurs turned to gasps. The community's trust shattered, revealing fractures that had been hidden beneath polite facades. The HOA board members were forced to face questions they hadn't prepared for. Ms. Graves remained stoic, but her defenses cracked under the weight of mounting accusations. The possibility of a formal investigation now seemed inevitable. But even as the community rallied, James knew this was far from over. The fight for his tree had become a fight for justice, a battle against a powerful system willing to silence anyone who dared stand in its way. That night, James sat beneath his oak tree, the leaves rustling softly in the cool breeze. The tree had survived storms, droughts, and neglect. Now, it was carrying the weight of a community's awakening. James whispered to the towering branches, "We're not done yet. This tree, this fight, it's about something bigger than all of us." The veteran felt a flicker of hope. The hidden truth was out, and with it came a chance for redemption. For himself, his neighbors, and the future of the neighborhood. With the evidence exposed and the community rattled, the conflict surrounding James Morgan's majestic oak tree transformed from a quiet dispute into a full-blown legal battle, and the neighborhood was never going to be the same. The day James received the letter from his attorney marked a turning point. The HOA was officially suing him for non-compliance with the tree removal order, seeking not only the fines they had already levied, but additional damages. The suit was aggressive and relentless, designed to intimidate and exhaust. James sat in, the cramped law office, the weight of the lawsuit pressing heavily on his shoulders. Yet, beneath the surface of frustration, a fierce determination burned. He had survived worse in combat. This fight was for his home, his dignity, and for the truth. Word spread quickly. The neighborhood divided into factions, some standing firmly with the HOA, convinced that the rules must be upheld and property values preserved. Others rallied behind James, seeing him as a symbol of resistance against corruption and bullying. Social media became a battleground. Posts and comments escalated into heated arguments. Some neighbors accused James of being stubborn and disruptive, while others praised his courage. The tension seeped into daily life. Casual greetings turned cold, and once friendly neighbors crossed streets to avoid encounters. At the courthouse, the hearings were tense and emotionally charged. The HOA's lawyers painted James as a lawbreaker, unwilling to cooperate and selfishly endangering the community. James's attorney countered with evidence of the HOA's conflicts of interest, financial irregularities, and lack of genuine safety concerns. One memorable day, James took the stand. His voice steady but filled with emotion. He spoke of his service, his deep connection to the tree, and his belief that the HOA's actions were unjust. The courtroom was silent as he finished. Some jurors visibly moved. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Save the Oak" and "Justice for James." The media coverage grew, turning a local dispute into a story with national resonance. A retired veteran standing up against a powerful organization. But the fight came at a cost. James's health suffered under the stress. Sleep became elusive. The financial strain mounted despite fundraising efforts. The once peaceful neighborhood was fractured, relationships strained to breaking points. Behind the scenes, whispers of settlement offers circulated. The HOA proposed a deal. Remove the tree voluntarily, and they would drop some fines. But James refused. To him, accepting the offer meant surrendering not just the tree, but his principles. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, James returned home to find a group of neighbors waiting on his porch. Some were old friends, others new supporters, all united by the fight. They brought food, words of encouragement, and most importantly, solidarity. That night, as James looked up at the oak's silhouette against the darkening sky, he realized the tree had become a beacon, a symbol of resilience in a community torn apart. The legal battle was far from over, but James was no longer alone. And no matter the outcome, the veteran knew he had sparked something that could never be undone. The final court hearing arrived like a thunderstorm, heavy with anticipation, charged with raw emotion, and threatening to wash away everything James Morgan had fought for. The courtroom was packed, reporters buzzing quietly in the back, neighbors from both sides present, their faces a mix of hope and anxiety. James sat quietly, his gaze occasionally drifting to the window where the silhouette of his beloved oak tree stood tall against the afternoon sky. The tree that had become more than just a tree. It was his symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and home. The HOA's attorneys began with their usual argument, the need for order, compliance, and uniform application of community rules. They presented their evidence, their voices steady, but lacking the passion James had seen in himself and his supporters. Then came James's turn. Standing before the judge, he spoke not just as a homeowner or a veteran, but as a man whose life intertwined with that tree's roots. He recounted his service, the trauma he'd endured, and the peace the oak had given him in his post-military life. He detailed the corrupt dealings he and his neighbors had uncovered, casting doubt on the board's motives and integrity. The courtroom held its breath as James concluded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. The judge's expression was unreadable, but then a surprising moment unfolded. A member of the HOA board, previously silent and rigid, stepped forward. It was Linda Graves, the president, the very woman who had spearheaded the removal order. Her voice was steady, but carried a tone of concession. "Your Honor," she said, "after reviewing new evidence and listening to Mr. Morgan's testimony, the board recognizes that mistakes were made. We agree to rescind the removal order for the tree and will conduct a full audit of our practices to restore trust in this community." Gasps and murmurs erupted in the courtroom. James's supporters smiled, some wiping tears away. Even some of the opposing neighbors looked relieved. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "This court appreciates the willingness of the parties to seek resolution. I am ordering the cessation of all fines related to this matter and encouraging continued dialogue within the community to repair the divisions." Outside the courthouse, cheers erupted. Reporters scrambled for interviews. James was hailed as a hero not just for saving a tree, but for standing up against corruption and bringing the community together. But the real victory was quieter, a reunion between neighbors who had been divided, a community beginning to heal. Back at home, James stood beneath the oak's sprawling branches, the late sun filtering through leaves like golden blessings. Martha and several neighbors joined him, their smiles genuine. "This tree," James said softly, "represents more than just wood and leaves. It's resilience, justice, and hope. And together we protected that." The veteran felt a deep peace settle over him, knowing the fight had changed more than just his yard. It had changed hearts. In the months that followed, the HOA underwent reforms. Transparency increased, new leadership emerged, and the neighborhood slowly knit itself back together. James often sat beneath the oak, the symbol of a battle won, but also of a community reborn. The $54,000 tree was safe, and so was the spirit of a retired veteran who refused to give up.